Hi, it's Michelle Tressler with Hinterland Brewery in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I'm here to offer my full and wholehearted endorsement of Get Hoptimized. They have been an absolute pleasure to work with for the last couple of years, and not only are they experts in the digital marketing game, but they're total pros when it comes to our partnership. They're reliable, organized, and they're generous.
Hey there, this is Robert Snyder with Big Dogs Brewing Company in Las Vegas, and we're excited to work with Chris and his team at Get Hoptimized. Not only do they do a great job with the creative side of the marketing that they do for us, but they also make us better, more organized, and more focused on building our brand. Highly recommend using Chris at Get Hoptimized.
Can't tell you how much good work they're doing for us and helping us grow our brands and in our restaurant. And I think you'll be in good hands if you choose to use Get Hoptimized.
Hey everybody, my name is Adam Mills of Adam Makes Beer, and today I'm going to be hosting a panel discussing 2025 craft beer trends. Trends are always an interesting thing to roll over. I think we've got a fun group of people to chat with today, and I think we're going to be able to get a lot of perspective. So let's jump into it. If I could just have everybody kind of go around, and we'll start with Barbara. I'm assuming we're all in the same configuration, but if we can just roll around, tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Excellent. I'm Barbara Stone and the National Sales Manager for Abstrax Hops. Next on my right is Mitch.
Nice. Yeah. Hi, I'm Mitch Steele. I'm the brewmaster, co-founder of New Realm Brewing Company. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia.
I'm Lee. I'm the brewmaster at Narragansett Beer in Providence, Rhode Island.
What's up, everybody? My name is Marty Scott. I run the barrel program at Revolution Brewing, and I also operate my own consulting firm called Barrelponics.
Well, thank you all for making the time to chat with us today. So kind of just off the top, I thought it was interesting before we went live. There were, there might be some different takes when it comes to trends themselves. So before we kind of start digging into some of the things that are trendy, what are some takes on trends in your space with your business? How important is tracking trends, staying up on trends? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm happy to take the first stab at this one, especially when it comes to the flavor space. Trends and fads are two completely different defined characteristics, and we definitely want to pay a little bit more attention to long-term trending flavors that are here to stay. And in the world of flavors, hop oils, advanced products, etc., we're finding that the trends that seem to be the most consistent are the ones that are reaching some sort of like childhood memorable experience, something that relates to a vintage time for the current drinker. So reflecting back now that the age is of drinking age, back to the video games. So those, when you were 16 years old and drinking Mountain Dew or some of these high energy drink, sugared flavored beverages, that is trending now in the alcoholic industry. If you really like those firecracker popsicles, those flavors are trending now in the alcoholic industry. So we definitely focus on a lot of where our current drinking age is at and what those flavors are that they most likely experienced and would have a play with now at the drinking age.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, given our clientele, and, we have 6 locations, and our clientele, our customer base in each location is very different from each other. But, speaking for Atlanta, definitely, the younger drinkers tend to come in and they're not looking for traditional beer flavors. They're looking for intense fruit flavors and sweetness and things like that. And, it's one of those things that we pay attention to a lot, whether it's through industry consultants, feedback at our bars, or just general trends in the market. So we rely on a lot of people to tell us what they're seeing as far as trends. Our salespeople are great at telling us about it. Our guests are great at telling us what we're missing. That's sometimes tough to hear, but it's I think it's really important, and the whole thing with beer kind of transitioning into lighter and heavier on the fruit flavors is something that we've reacted to, I think, fairly quickly. But it's something that is sticking around a lot longer than I thought it would.
Sure. And before we go around and get everybody else's take, you mentioned sometimes that's hard to hear. What is difficult about hearing some of that feedback?
Well, I've been in this business a long time, almost 40 years. And when you get people coming in that say they don't have any interest in, or they don't buy a beer you think is absolutely stellar, but it's traditional, and having to kind of let loose of the traditional beer flavors, that's tough. It's hard for a lot of us on the brewing team. I'd love it if everybody drank an English mild every day, but it just doesn't happen. And you gotta let go. And sometimes it's a little bit painful.
Sure. Thank you for fleshing that out. Sure. Lee, it looks like you had some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, that really struck a nerve with me, Mitch. I feel that so hard. If I could get everybody on like Fuggle Hop Maris Otter beers, like that's all I want to drink. That's all I want to brew. Well, that's not all I want to brew, but expanding a little bit more from my side on what Barbara said, we're also definitely seeing nostalgia play a part in driving sales in our taproom, and coming from a legacy brand like Narragansett, that's something that we can really lean into, pairing with sort of the overall beer trends. We have this thing called the Vault series where I do throwback Narragansett recipes, and we're seeing drinkers, not shoot for the middle so much, especially our clientele, they're either going one end of the ABV spectrum or the other. So, we've been having a lot of fun playing into nostalgia, doing our throwback American lagers, things in the Vault series, German lagers, Czech lagers, and keeping them within that sort of sweet spot in terms of both price point and ABV for our consumers, which we see becoming more and more a factor when people are coming up to our beer board and making their selection. The other thing we're seeing is balance and quality. I love brewing hoppy beers, but the way things were trending for a while, and I'm just going to be very candid here, I think craft beer sort of got a little bit into itself for a little too long. You sit at the bar and you're like, what hops are there? I don't like Simcoe. I'm not going to try this beer. It's not so much about that anymore. It's creating an overall totally balanced, totally flavorful experience for our customer, because we're seeing the emerging drinkers that come into our taproom not so focused on, ticking a box, finding the next big thing, tasting the next new great hop. That certainly helps sometimes. They're more focused on that overall drinking experience and enjoying a pint from start to finish, as opposed to sort of chasing ingredients, chasing untapped scores, things like that, which is equal parts refreshing, but it's also a little bit of a new frontier in terms of like the super hoppy world.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I feel like sometimes I question myself and the way that I have encouraged front of house to push beers that I'm making. Was I telling them, was I only talking to a craft beer nerd? How many people that came into my place know what the difference is between Maris Otter and some other two-row malt? How many other people know about this hop as opposed to that hop? Sometimes I wonder if, on some level, listen, things change, things evolve, but sometimes I wonder how much sometimes as brewers we could have contributed to this kind of disconnect between people with talking about ingredient as opposed to flavor. That's just something I've turned over in my head.
For sure. And it's such a fine line to walk between, giving folks the information and, yeah, we use these sexy hops, we use this sexy malt. I want to give both front of house and our consumer that information without kind of sniffing my own farts about it too much, if that makes sense. Like,
No, I get it. I didn't think I was going to be consenting to getting that today, but yes, I do get it. Marty, let's get some feedback from you on this. So yeah, tell me just some high level thoughts on trends and maybe some stuff that's been said here today.
Oh, of course. Revolution Brewing here in Chicago, we've been the largest independent brewer in the state of Illinois for over 13 years now. It's now more than ever imperative that we pay attention to these trends. But because we're large, we rely so heavily on a large distribution network. We can't just chase every trend that comes our way. We have to think about how much effort it takes for Revolution to present one of these products in distribution and in the market, in the broader marketplace. So for a long time, going back to, touching on what Mitch was talking about, we've never been able to, it's never been harder for brewers to make the beer that we want to drink and have that pay the bills. We have to, more now so than ever before, abandon the milds and the Helles and all that. So I'm not abandoning them, but we can't keep the lights on with just that, most of us, unless you're a well-known lager house or something. So we've seen at Revolution last couple of years, we've leaned into hop water. We are in the process now of launching a whole new brand. We started another company for our Reverb THC product. We've got 4 different product lines, or 4 different categories rather, within that one product line that we're fleshing out. We're also doing a RTD cocktail collaboration that I can't talk about just yet, but we're making a whiskey sour inspired beer with no whiskeys. We've kind of tying in with innovation a little bit. We've got some oak sitting on a beer in a Grundy tank right now, just getting way over oaked. And then we're going to make a sour beer using a brand new GMO Saccharomyces that makes lactic acid. And we're going to blend those two together to make our kind of RTD just out of beer and wood. So we're trying to say yes to as many things as we can, because we see our legacy brands are the trend is not good, right? And we can either just let that go, or we can be proactive. And we're at the point now where we're seeing a lot of people other than us being very proactive. We're just not quite as nimble. But yeah, it's never been more challenging from a creative standpoint. I think we knew how to make alt beer. We knew how to make American Pale Ale. We certainly know how to make an IPA or a barley wine. And that's what we like to do. But here we are finding new things to make and new ways to make them on a pretty regular basis here these days.
I think it was kind of a big lesson to learn in my brewing career. And I think it's important as brewers that at some point along the line, we probably have all had to internalize this. I was working at a place, I was kegging up a beer, and the owner of the company said, "I can't wait to get that stupid beer back on tap." And I said, what do you mean? He goes, he said, "I hate that beer." And I said, "Then why are you making it?" And he said, "I can hate it, but they love it." And I think that there is some times where you have to say, hey, there's some beers that I make, there's some products that I make to help the bottom line of the company. And then I have this other space where I can still do things, the things that are special to me. The next thing I want to throw out there is, what do you feel as if, because I think as brewers, we really struggle with the idea of gimmick. Some people have jumped have no problem with just saying hey, listen, this is hot right now. We're going to do it. We're going to strike while the iron's hot. What is the line between trend and gimmick in your minds?
Glitter.
I forgot about glitter.
Oh God, the Pink Boots forums used to all be like, "How do I keep my glitter in suspension?" Like, oh, God, no.
That's the line,
I think,
Adam. That's the line.
I always look at it as repeat buys. If the product tastes good, even if it's something really off the wall, but people continue to buy it, that's probably takes it out of the gimmick category. I don't know. That's a tough question. I try not to get into gimmick stuff too much, but we have done a little bit of it. I draw the line at green beer at St. Patrick's Day.
Sure.
I don't. Sure. I've been asked to do that several times and have not done it. But using natural fruits or something to add color to a beer, I'm all about if it tastes good. But I think if somebody will buy it more than once and not just try it because it's something completely off the wall and then never try it again, I think that's where you get into something that's beyond a gimmick.
Sure.
Yeah, I kind of use my parents as like the warning post here because they like historically have always jumped on technological trends like way too late. Like they got me an Encyclopedia Britannica set like the year before the internet really hit big. So it's like hitting that sweet spot of like, is this just going to read desperate? And do I have enough passion behind it? And can I craft something that's high quality that I'm proud of, instead of just like, oh yeah, let's just like hug glitter in this and send it to market and that's good. It's like, no, let's look at the parameters here and think about really making the best beverage you can as well. And if you can't figure out how to do that, maybe that trend is not for you.
I think that there's also a fine line between what is a trend and what is a gimmick based on your business aspect. I mean, there's going to be things that someone like Marty at Revolution can get away with because he's in Chicago, and it's going to make much more sense to his consumer base, and likely they will want him to do that year after year. I mean, they do turn the river green in Chicago for St. Patrick's Day. Maybe a green beer at Revolution makes way more sense than a green beer at New Realm, which would mean less gimmicky, more expectation and tradition, etc. So I think it also has a lot to do with just who you are as a company. Maybe your company is going to be one that gets away with some one-offs that attract attention, and your customers just really expect that from you.
That's a fair point. Us specifically, if we were going to do green beer, I think we did on an episode of Brew Dogs like 10 or 12 years ago. It was terrible. But our tap room at least has very little foot traffic. We're in an industrial corridor. There's no parking lot anywhere close by. There are no fancy restaurants anywhere nearby. So when people come to Revolution, they come here on purpose. If we had a ton of foot traffic and people were just tired of window shopping and they wanted to stop in for a cold drink, then I think we would probably have a more broadly democratized draft list, and that may include pitchers of green beer around St. Patty's. Right now, we'll do a nitro stout and maybe an Irish red or something like that. But I'd like to go back to what Lee has said 1.5 times so far. I think it comes down to balance and quality. If you can do it with balance and quality, and bonus points if the brewers can be prideful about what they're doing, because we know there's a part of us internally. We know, is this just a quick grab for attention? Is there some desperation here? Are we doing this because it'll make a really good Instagram post, or because we actually want to slide these beers across our bars to our faithful consumers who, again, in our case especially, are here on purpose? I'll add 20 pounds of freshly roasted coffee to one of these barrels behind me and make a beer that's simultaneously cold brew coffee made out of barrel-aged stout rather than cold brew coffee added to barrel-aged stout. Is it gimmicky? I don't know. I think it's balanced, it's high quality, and it's actually pretty darn drinkable if you do a good job. Not that that's a fad or any, like nobody's doing that. Like I'm not seeing anybody else, but just a for example. But yeah, coming back, pride, balance, high quality, and we know if this is something we want to do, or we just want to sell.
Well, and let's not forget that, what was it? Not even 10 years ago when, I don't know, I would guess everybody on this call said, we're never making a hazy beer. And haze was expected to be a fad, and that it was here to come and go. And it's not, it's here to stay. It turned into not just a fad or a trend, but just an integral part of the craft beer industry now. So I think we don't always have the foresight to know what is here to stay and what isn't. But it's definitely going to be a trend at first, or a fad at first, and it'll make its way into, longevity or not.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, the hazy IPA situation was one that, there had been several offshoots of IPA that came and went very quickly before that one came. And so I was very skeptical of it. And, and not that I dislike them or anything, but I was just kind of wondering if it was going to go the same way as white IPA and black IPA and everything else that came and went within a year.
Brewed IPA.
Yeah.
Or brewed IPA, which is another story. I think, the thing for us, even though I had to be coerced into brewing a hazy IPA, I spent some time learning how to do it and talking to people about how to actually make a good one. It's become our number one brand, and by far, and love it or hate it, it's it's been a great success story for us. So I think you're absolutely right, though. I was looking at it as just another IPA fad, and it certainly turned the corner and became a real thing that has a lot of staying power.
Well, and something that I love that you said, you went out of your way to learn how to do it well. And I think that there is a certain amount of humility that is required of us as brewers to be able to dive in on something that maybe you're not the most excited about because it's something that you and your brand need to be looking at. I like that. So, I know we've talked, hazy has been a thing, still continues to be a thing. I know lager has been popping more in the craft space just from a beer standpoint. So the beverage of beer, what are the styles that we're seeing that are really trending up? Whether you look at it from a pub standpoint, for a distro standpoint, what are you all seeing? Because I know there can be, geographical differences.
In our tap room, our Bohemian Pilsner, our Czech Pils, dominates the leaderboard, followed by IPAs, which we have 12 taps in our tap room. And those are always at the top, followed by fruit. We've been looking at our numbers, like peak year of sales, I think for us was 2023. So far, our tap room's been open since 2021. And we're sort of looking at the numbers we're getting and the numbers that we have gotten at our peak so far, and what's different, what's the deciding factor in that. And it's falling high or low on that ABV spectrum, followed by fruit. Our Mexican lager has lime in it. We did a blood orange pale ale, things like that. They're not always specifically fruit forward beers, but that's sort of that's the running theme that we're seeing in terms of like our peak sales.
Yeah, I'll say our tap room is very different than what we see successful in distribution. In distribution, it's all IPAs, and but we're seeing a lot of light lager sales. So, the lower alcohol, lower calorie lagers, are doing well for us. We have a German Pilsner that has continuously done well since we started, which I'm very happy about. The other thing that we see in our tap rooms is fruited sours. We have been asked to provide 2 at all times to all of our tap rooms because they do so well. And totally agree on the fruit thing. The lagers, we have probably 5 or 6 different lagers on tap right now, which is, kind of nice. It's not 100% IPAs. But.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I see a lot. I'm based out of my home in Oregon, and I see a lot of West Coast IPA, obviously being king here in the Northwest, but really it's the juicy forward, less bitter IPAs. And in particular, West Coast Pilsners have a pretty huge popularity right now in tap rooms and with drinkers. So I would put West Coast Pilsner as one of the big trends right now.
Nice.
Yep. Agreed.
Absolutely, yeah. West Coast anything. We're seeing West Coast IPA is now taking a permanent slot in our IPA variety pack in the last couple of months. We're seeing West Coast. We just made a West Coast or like / New Zealand style lager where we're using some of these advanced hop products. We've got we're in year number 2 of our premium lager called Cold Time, which is just pretty honest to goodness. Easy drinking lager. It's not lagered for 2 months or step crashed or decocted or anything. It's just a simple premium lager. And then we're also seeing, especially in convenience stores, this is not much of an on-premise, shaker of worlds, but we do a 19.2 kind of competing with Goose Island Lagunitas with their low bitterness IPA beverages with the advanced hop products, Abstrax products. Where it's super low bitterness, 10 ABV, 19.2. When you're drinking for effect and you don't want to break the bank, we're seeing these things move pretty well in the convenience side.
Sure. We've fruit has come up multiple times, and there's always new products, different ways to be using things. How is everybody utilizing fruit or products that can deliver fruit flavors and aromas to their beers?
I use Abstrax. we have a blood orange pale. We have a West Coast blood orange pale on this summer that the Abstrax products have just done wonderfully for. We don't like to fall back on WAP. Sometimes we zhuzh it, but I think in terms of us using real fruit and augmenting with something to zhuzh that, because we ferment out fully, so it comes off a bit dry and a bit pithy that way, especially with the citrus. Finding something just to round out that flavor, and we found great success in not just sticking by one product to do that, but finding a good mix and spending a lot of time just doing flavor samples to get that really round front to back palate, full flavor.
Because you kind of need to layer, right? That's always been that.
Yeah.
I always feel like I've had the most success going sometimes with the real product, layering with a natural extract or various things. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. When I first really started doing fruit, and we were doing a lot of fruited sours, it was like all real fruit all the time, and sort of building on that and realizing, when you take that sip, there's sort of a hole in the middle there. You need some back sweetness to follow through. You need a rounder flavor, and really just getting that blend and thinking outside the box on that. Like, if we make an apple flavored pale ale or something like that, and something in the middle isn't working, try a little bit of apricot, something else, like really thinking outside the box to get that full front to back, because as Barbara said, these sort of nostalgic fruity flavors are trending now, and you want to give folks more of that experience, as opposed to like, we only use these all natural apricots that grew on the south side of this tree, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, we typically use a combination of real fruit in puree or concentrated juice, and then top that off with some sort of flavor combination. And one of the things that we found, especially working with Abstrax and some other natural flavors, is just blending flavors adds layers and the complexity that we're looking for, and even blending other fruit flavors into it. Like our orange product has a little bit of lemon and a little bit of lime, just to really make it pop. And I think that's something that we've learned over the years, kind of accidentally, but it really works for us and is very effective.
Well, and I think there's a culinary lens there, right? Because you're talking about, especially when you're talking about the lemon lime, and I've heard other brewers say that too, where they love to fold in a little bit of lemon, a little bit of lime into something else that they're trying to prop up, because it can make things pop from an acidity standpoint. It can support, like when you're making chocolate chip cookies, there's vanilla in there, but they're not vanilla cookies. The vanilla is a magnifier, right? So I love that idea of actually folding the other things in to kind of create a wider range of flavor. I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, it's almost like. Go ahead.
Thank you. We'll use Abstrax for our big, low bitterness, fruity, kind of juicy IPA products. We will use juice concentrate products for most of our fruited kettle sours. We make out of lemon crystals. We make our own flavoring syrup for our lemonade beer on our 60-barrel brew house, which is our middle-sized brew house. We make that during lemonade season a couple times during the summer. We fire up the brew house. We make our own flavoring syrup out of citric acid, lemon crystals, and cane sugar. Or for the barrel-aged beers, if you're watching and not listening, I got a wall of barrels behind me. That's our Deepwood series of typically English beers, stouts, barley wine, stuff like that. When we fruit those, we're using just purees after aging, and most of the time it's a combination that gets it done. If it's cherry, we'll use a custom blend of sweet and tart. Again, we can grab that little bit of acid and just fundamentally changes the way everything else is perceived. Or we did a mixed berry thing a number of years ago, really kind of reaching out there, challenging ourselves, and we were looking for this like minority fruit to kind of round it out. And we were thinking blueberry, and blueberry, just a tiny little bit of blueberry for whatever reason was just muddling the whole thing. You take that out and you swap in a little bit of cranberry, which didn't fit the bill for the rest of the fruit in the blend. And all of a sudden it all made sense, and you could smell and taste and appreciate everything about the beer. Just swapping out a tiny little minority. So yeah, there's definitely a culinary opportunity here, or a culinary lens, at least in the best cases in my experience.
Yeah, Adam, I think that there's a small consideration also in understanding that there is a consistency piece to this that brewers have to be on their game with, in that very much in the same realm as hops can have a completely different flavor and aroma profile depending on their crop year, where they were grown. Raspberries, cherries, blackberries, apples, they all have the same consideration and or complete crop loss depending on where they are sourced in the world and what the current climate is there, or any weather events have happened. So part of the brewing sort of take on the spice cabinet and what's in it and how they use it is doing that raw material review every time it comes in. If it's a new lot, you got to look at your raspberry puree. Is it different? The color is different. The pectin load is different. And then how can you make your beverage more consistent if consistency is the key outcome that you're looking for along with quality? And so that's, I think, why a lot of people like Mitch and Lee and Marty start looking at the top note of those natural flavor opportunities, is because it can help cover up some inconsistencies with the real fruit year over year, and also be an important player for the round out aspect of it.
Sure. Go ahead.
Sorry, very quickly. The other thing here is price point. Fruit gets expensive, it gets quick. And I don't know about you guys, but we're seeing people now a lot less likely to take a chance and break the bank. Beer collectors, that thing is kind of falling by the wayside. And you want to hit something in that sweet spot for a price point. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting on it forever because, the current climate is what it is, and people aren't going out as much, and they're not spending as much when they do.
I saw a lot of nodding heads when we started talking about Abstrax. I know there's Abstrax. There's some other folks out there, kind of in that advanced hop product range. Are there any tips or tricks? Boots on the ground stuff that you're seeing that with utilizing something like an Abstrax type product, practically, how are you using that and how are you getting the best success out of those products?
I do. I think I've got Abstrax. So I've got the blood orange on tap. I've got terpenes in a tank, and I've got advanced hop products in a tank as well. And I found, following manufacturer sort of recommendations here to be very, very key. Start small and then build from there. You can't go balls to the wall as much as you want to and as delicious as it is. And most of the time when I do this, I'm like, I could have gone harder on this. Next time I'm gonna. Yeah. But really figuring out, the product you're working with, be it Abstrax or Yakima Chief or whatever. Everybody's got some sort of advanced flowable hop product pretty much at this point. Find out what you're working with and how it plays into your existing process and flavor profile and product. Overall,
do you find that something that you can benchtop into a smaller volume of beer and it will express pretty well with the scale up?
For the most part, what I like to do is go lower end of the threshold and just go in a 20 barrel batch, just full send.
We do a lot of benchtop testing here at New Realm, and we've used a lot of the Abstrax hop products to augment Type 90 dry hop, and they were very helpful in recommending starting points for that. But it just kind of kicks it up. Instead of using 3 to 4 pounds of a dry hop per barrel, which gets ridiculously expensive these days, and the beer cost is on everybody's mind right now. We can keep it at a reasonable rate, a pound to a pound and a half per barrel, and then use a little bit of an Abstrax hop product to just take it to the level that we're looking for. We did a really nice kind of old school double IPA that way earlier this year, where we just topped it up with some Centennial Omni, and it was great. But to me, again, it's about being price conscious, efficiency conscious, and then also flavor conscious, and I think all of those play into it. And, benchtop testing is our holy grail for this. And it usually scales up reasonably well. We might have to go back and make an adjustment on it, but it's a great exercise, and we have a good person in the lab who does all that for us and follows our direction really well and comes up with ideas himself. So.
And I know you do quite a bit of distribution. One of the things that always sticks in my mind is when that beer goes off to store shelves in cans and whatnot. Sometimes it's warm, sometimes it's cold. How are these advanced hop products holding up over time? Do you feel like they have a longer flavor and aroma stability than potentially like a T90 or like a cryo? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they hold up better. We've been able to extend shelf life a little bit when we use them. It's interesting. And I think, the other thing that's interesting, not to change the subject here, but using the gene edited violizing yeast also prolongs shelf life quite a bit. And so, yeah, those are some nice results of using these products that have helped us out tremendously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How many folks are running violized strains in-house?
Once or twice a year. Yep.
Yeah.
We've piloted a couple of brews, but just like 1 or 2 barrels. We haven't done anything full scale.
Sure. Something that I wanted to bounce off you as well, because we're kind of talking about trends, newer things. We've talked a little bit of the beer side. What about on the process side? Kind of looking at through that brewer's lens. What are some things that you are incorporating on the process side, and maybe thinking about specifically process aids, enzymes, different things like that? And maybe it's something you've been using for a while, but you feel like it's under recognized, kind of within the brewing community as far as tools that we can and should be leveraging in the brew house.
We've been using a lot of amylase enzyme for some of our products. It's we just don't call it brewed IPA anymore, but
Sure.
But those enzyme, making the beer dry, for bigger alcohol beers where you have the alcohol providing a heck of a lot of body, that's a pretty effective technique to get a beer cost within a reasonable point for something that high in alcohol, and that's something that we've utilized in the past year a little more frequently.
So a note on that. So when you're going to be utilizing an enzyme like that, are you basically taking the beer down to zero from a density standpoint?
Yeah, we don't go quite zero, but unless we're doing
lean.
like a low carb lager. But
Sure.
it finishes. The beer finishes at about 1 Plato,
Yeah.
which takes a lot of time in the brew house to not use enzyme and get it there.
Sure. So do you feel as if, what is that ABV threshold where you feel as if I'm getting over this range of ABV, I can be kind of subbing in some of that impression of body with the alcohol that I'm achieving, as opposed to a higher finishing gravity?
For us, it's about 8.5 to 9, somewhere in that range. If you're trying to do, like Marty was talking about, doing a 10% beer for C stores, that's where it could play.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're definitely using a little bit of amylase on those IPA type C-store beverages. We're not going hard at it, but we find that the little yeasties appreciate a little bit more fermentability when we're asking it to hit 10 ABV. Just a little bit more reliable, and we don't really mind having a little bit of 4-palate sweetness there. Any of our residual sugars are probably going to be fairly simple anyway. For those products, that's a death sentence for a barley wine, but for a C-store hazy IPA called Juicy Rush or something like that, it's playing hand in hand with the fruit and going back to some of those more recognizable flavor and drinking experiences we were talking about earlier.
How controllable do you feel as if those enzyme additions are in the mash? Do you feel like very reliably I can be inputting X amount of this enzyme into this beer, this grist, and I'm going to reliably get the dryness that I want out of this beer? How much playing is there with that, or is it fairly dialed in as far as the recommended usage rates?
Oh my gosh, there's so many variables there. I mean, you've got mash conversion, rest temperature, time, your strike water temperature. It definitely takes a lot of work to dial it in. I think once you dial it in, it's pretty consistent. But
Sure.
Hitting those targets the first time is pretty hard. And yeast strain is very important as well. I mean, all the variables you have in brewing play a role in this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've even gone back and forth between adding in the mash vessel and adding just straight to our yeast pitch. We'll toss in, or we'll pitch the tank. We'll open her up real quick and drop that enzyme, and we'll cool into that enzyme in a lot of cases. And yeah, like Mitch said, it's all over the place until you get it sorted, and then if you're a good brewer, and what's a good brewer, hopefully that stabilizes with time and you can get that repeatability.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's interesting, Adam. I work with a lot of customers, national brands and small micro brands. And what we're finding on the process front is, 50% of their innovation is devoted to new recipe development, but 50%, 40%, 30% is all process improvement. And so the majority of breweries are focusing their time right now on reducing the times that they have to touch a tank, reducing the inputs and reducing the number of hop additions or any time that someone has to go manually do something. They're putting a dollar value to every single second that someone is touching that beer in process. So while I don't have a brewery and I can't really speak anymore to being in a craft brewery, what I will say is from a fundamental aspect of being a supplier is if people are not putting a dollar value on process aids and a return on investment, then they're really missing the boat on helping make their beer more affordable.
Sure. So here's one that's kind of near and dear to my heart. So I've been in the industry for 14 years. I do content, pro brewing content. I haven't drank a beer in 2 years because I have developed what appears to be a very solid gluten issue from an inflammation standpoint. So sometimes like a product like a Brewer's Clarex, that might be a brand name, but there are some things floating out there and talking about reducing time and potentially energy expenditure utilizing products like that. Can anybody on panel speak to a product like that, something that is meant to reduce chill haze, improve filterability, or and then potentially even shorten that tank residency time? Does anybody have any experience with that?
I hate to say this because as an old fuddy-duddy brewer, I don't like to rely on this, but ALDC, we add that to a lot of our beers, and it's not by any means a fail-safe, but it is sort of a second defense against diacetyl in your beer. So we use it in a lot of our lagers, and that, well, it doesn't necessarily shorten tank residency. It helps to ensure that residency won't go longer than expected, and it's always sort of a constant. So we follow proper diacetyl procedure, but we also utilize ALDC just to make sure that beer is getting out of that tank when it needs to.
Yeah, we've done some trialing with ALDC as well, and it does help, when you get to that diacetyl rest step, it helps make that more predictable as far as passing sensory. I think that's a good thing. The other thing that we've looked at as far as residence time is just alternative yeast strains. And we've done some beers with, some Kvike yeast that, ferment at warmer temperatures, and the tank turnaround times, is halved. And, and it depends on the beer, whether that works or not. I mean, I wouldn't do a traditional Pilsner with Kvike Lutra, but if you're doing a light flavored beer, it doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional lager yeast that you use in it. And you can turn it around very quickly. And that's been very effective for us.
What do you feel is of a temperature range for Lutra that, and there's always so much, I don't know. I feel like those Kvike strains, the information for them started to hit. There was a ton of interest. And then as always, people kind of switch to different things. From a practical standpoint, if you are just talking about a light, easy drinking beer made with something like a Lutra, what are some parameters that you feel as if that strain deals with quite well or performs quite well in producing a beer like that?
So I think the key thing is temperature, fermentation temperature, and the Kvike strains were touted as being able to ferment in the mid-90s, and just rip through a fermentation in a couple of days. And we cap ours at about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. We don't let them get that high because then they start getting you know, a little funky, a little Belgian-y, throw in some fruit and some spice character, some phenol character, and things like that. So we've kept the temperature capped, and we still get a pretty quick fermentation time, but you know, we're keeping the flavors pretty mellow.
Sure. Any other thoughts on, because I was going to ask about ALDC, any other thoughts on the enzyme process type side, kind of creating efficiencies there?
We also spun pretty much everything that's not dry hopped, and that we unitank everything that doesn't go into a lagering tank and is not our hard juice or seltzer. And we're finding that to be really beneficial too, both from an aroma standpoint, and just as Barbara said, like touching the tank, you know, in terms of carving a tank, it takes maybe an hour as opposed to 2 or 3 at this point. And that process has really worked well for us for a lot of reasons, CO2 cost being the primary one.
Sure. Spunding all around. Is everybody spun? Okay.
Yeah, I think I could add, you know, again, with the barrel-aged beers, when we're fruiting those, we're using nothing but purees. And going back to what Barbara was talking about, you could have variable pectin loads, crop to crop or fruit to fruit. So when a depectinized example isn't available, we've taken to just, when we rack our fruit, again, we're doing this unfermented because we want it to be bright and vibrant, fresh, unoxidized. We'll add the pectinase enzyme to our fruit. We'll pump that into our tank, and then we'll purge the tank of its atmosphere through the fruit to both stir up the pectinase. It also deaerates the fruit for us, again, because we're not going to ferment that fruit. So there's a ton of oxygen load there as well. So we just, you know, nail the tank bottom, the conical bottom with CO2 or nitrogen. And then just through, you know, purging the tank, we're also deaerating the fruit. You got to go a little bit hard and a little bit long just to make sure that the headspace isn't going to be full of oxygen that came out of the fruit.
Sure. What does that flow rate look like?
If I'm doing it, probably, I'm not really sure the flow rate, but we always do really high pressure, low flow, just to create a natural check valve, so we don't get fruit, you know, going into the CO2 line, because that's a bad day. So yeah, I'll do 30-40 psi through a high flow rate line, but I'll just crack the valve open and we'll let that go. But with the pectinase, you know, we're not really reducing the residency time, but there's another way we can reduce beer costs, and that's to decrease cost of goods through getting a better yield. We see that using the pectinase enzyme, we're able to squeeze a lot more of the goodness from the solids and the pectins and stuff like that. And it allows the tank bottom and the centrifuge to handle that soil load to where these expensive fruit purees 9 times out of 10 are going to be volume additive rather than volume depletive, just because there's all that haze and all that solid matter that you have to get rid of. You know, unless you're okay with chunks of fruit in your beer, which we try to shy away from that. But we see not from a tank residency time, but more from a final yield. We can get a lot more efficient using pectinase on our whole fruits.
Can I just say that that's so cool, and I want to try it now?
The pectinase?
The whole purging.
Yeah, well, you can let it rip.
Yeah, well, and I do like the idea of getting some some non-atmosphere gas through that puree as well. You know what I mean? I do think sometimes there's some hidden areas of oxidation, especially when we're doing maybe some non-traditional things with our beers, right? I think that's really interesting. And I guess because we're kind of running up to our time here, and I did just want to say thank you to everybody that's watching, and definitely to all of our guests sharing their time with us today. Just any final thoughts or any anything that we didn't have time to discuss today surrounding this concept of trends, innovation, anything like that in our space?
I think from where I sit in trends, innovation, flavor, etc., is the technology has advanced. And if you are traditionally opposed to advanced products or fermentation aids or finishing aids, the time is now to jump in. The technology is good, the products are good quality, and your beer deserves to be less expensive to make and good quality going out to the consumers. And then secondly, Mitch had mentioned there is a historical concern with using a natural flavor declaration in your craft beer. And I believe that is gone with most consumer base. And you need to remember that you're making the beer people are willing to drink or want to drink. And sometimes that's not always what our biases are based on our decades in the industry. So the time is now to trust your suppliers and reach out and look at what the technology has provided to make your beer better and more cost effective.
Yeah, I would echo that. From the respect of really leaning on your suppliers to help you with your innovation. We have an innovation call every 2 weeks, and one of the topics that we cover is what's new on the supplier side that we can use to our advantage. It's amazing the innovation work that's going on at the supplier level, be it hop suppliers or process aid suppliers. There's so much coming at us right now, and really, the more you talk with your suppliers, the better off you're going to be when you try to innovate using some of these products. It's great stuff.
Something I've found refreshing, and this builds on what Barbara said, is at the end of the day, beer's fun. Beer brings people together. It historically, that's why one of the reasons why beer is so important. So just staying true to that from a price point, like, is this pumpkin beer what I want to be brewing right now? Maybe not, but have fun with it.
Yeah, it's hard to add a whole lot worthwhile to those three. But the beer drinker, air quotes if you're not watching, is a more diverse person now than ever before. So things are gonna kick off as trends in these subcultures in beer drinkers. So we now more than ever before, we have to be prepared and willing to execute a very wide variety of beers and even non-beer beverages. And yeah, the suppliers and our relationships have never been more important because we've never had to do so many things at once as a brewery. Revolution here in another couple of years, we're going to be considered a beverage company and brewery. Whereas, 5-10 years ago, when we were in planning meetings and innovation meetings, it was, are we going to do this? Like, no, we are a beer company, and now we can't do that anymore. So yeah, I'd parrot what everybody else said. Trust your suppliers, listen to your suppliers. Those relationships are invaluable.
I do think it's interesting too. When you log your years in the industry, you realize that things ebb and flow. Things pop up. Things recede. One of the things, because I do think it can be challenging for people that have that for the love of the beer thing, and they love their classic styles and they love all of those things. But I do think whether you're making an RTD, a fermented product, in some way, shape, or form, I think it's a good thing to maintain and respect your love for being a person of process, because no matter what happens, we need to be excellent from a hands-on perspective of handling this beverage. And I think we can all appreciate that on some level, even though it might not be a Czech Pils that's going into the tank. I think both in yourself and then in the people you manage, there is something important too, as we kind of talk about this trend subject. we want to be great process people as part of what fills us up as professionals. So anyways, I think we're running up to time here. This was so much fun. I really appreciated being able to get some insights from all of you. And just thank you again for being on.
Thank you, Adam. This is
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.